Hi, everyone. I am Jean Franco from the Department of Political Science of the University of the Philippines. I am thankful to Liz Kramer and to the Sydney Southeast Asia Center for inviting me to present the Philippine update. We are certainly in the midst of one of the most challenging times in human history, and I am just extremely grateful for this opportunity to present to you key developments in the Philippines. Several analysts have actually looked at Philippine politics from different lenses, that it is personality-oriented, lacking in mature political parties, and that it is an illiberal democracy, its politics is elitist, and that its institutions are weak. I make this presentation using a different lens. In discussing recent political developments, I frame my discussion using the lens of feminist politics. What I mean by this is that I will look at the developments in terms of the ways in which they show the different ways in which notions of what it is to be a man and a woman shape the nature of politics in the Philippines, especially in the time of Duterte. This overall argument of the presentation The overall argument of the presentation is that Duterte's continued popularity is anchored on his masculinized image as a protector and a father out to protect his constituents from the evils of drugs. His behavior does not only show disdain for women political opponents, but also anything that may be called or labeled as quote-unquote feminine. In this regard, his misogynist remarks do not really disrupt the gender order. What I mean by gender order is a traditional way in which society usually looks at men and women, that men are masculine and therefore are superior, while women are feminine and therefore represent weakness or are inferior. Let me begin by saying that Duterte remains to be very popular. In the latest survey in December 2019, 8 out of 10 Filipinos trust him. The same number of Filipinos also trust the much criticized war on drugs, in which more than 20,000 Filipinos were reportedly killed by authorities, according to human rights groups. Meanwhile, the economy continues to grow, although it has been a bit stalled by the budget impasse in 2019 that has halted key infrastructure projects. Moreover, 5.9 Filipinos got out of poverty in 2019. In 2016, poverty rate was 23.3% and it fell to 16% in 2019. In this update, I am presenting 3 important developments in the Philippines that I think should be given attention. These are media harassment, harassment of women politicians, and the recent response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I will start with media harassment. As some of you may know, the Philippines is no stranger to media harassment. In the Marcos years, major networks were shut down, resulting in the government as being the only purveyor of information. But in the past 2 years, according to a media monitoring organization, media harassment has persisted. As of December 2019, there were 154 documented attacks and threats against journalists, and out of these, 69 had been linked to state or government perpetrators. There are actually several types of harassment on the media. For one, the country's major television network, ABS-CBN, has also been threatened by the president and even by the Speaker of the House of Representatives in terms of the non-renewal of its franchise to operate. Thousands held protests to criticize this. However, it is not a coincidence that the poster journalists for media harassment are women. First, a reporter from Rappler who was not allowed to enter the presidential palace because of her unfair reporting of the administration, figured in the news. The second, and one that made the headlines around the world, is Maria Ressa. Her arrest in 2019 upon arriving from abroad shocked journalists all over the world. Maria Ressa is one of the founders of Rappler. Rappler has been accused of the anti-dummy law. Allegedly, Rappler and the company that owns it has foreign ownership issues. What I want to emphasize in this situation is that when a woman in the public sphere is threatened by powerful men, it is easy for most people to accept this because a woman is supposed to be only in the private sphere, perceived as weak, and not opinionated, like journalists are. But the consequence of harassing women in the media prevents diversity of information and opinion. It also discourages women from expressing their voice by way of the media. Aside from women in the media, the present administration has also harassed women politicians who are identified with the opposition. Their so-called mortal sin is going against the war on drugs and the main programs of the administration. Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno, who is an appointee of former President Aquino, is a case in point. She was ousted as Supreme Court Justice because she allegedly failed to be transparent about her wealth as a public official. She was appointed very young and would have been in the Supreme Court until she is 70 years old, as the law states. Soon, an impeachment process was already started by allies of the administration in the House of Representatives. However, the Supreme Court affirmed the quo warranto petition that was lodged by the Solicitor General, who is also a Duterte ally. Let it be recalled that early on in the Duterte administration, the former Chief Justice stated that there should be due process to the suspects on the drug war. She also opposed martial law in Mindanao that was implemented in 2017 until 2019. Vice President Leni Robredo is another politician that has long earned the ire of Duterte and has long been the recipient of sexist remarks from Duterte, from the length of her skirt to rhetoric that she is not fit to be president because the military will not like a female president. It will be recalled that Vice President Leni Robredo won by a very thin margin against another Duterte ally who is the son of the former dictator Ferdinand Marcos. To the surprise of many, Leni Robredo accepted the appointment by Duterte in November 2019. To the surprise of many, Leni Robredo accepted the appointment of Robredo in an interagency anti-drug council in November 2019. Unfortunately, she served only for 19 days. And during the time that she was appointed, she was barraged with sexist remarks from Duterte allies that she is not fit for the position. Duterte himself remarked that she is scatterbrained. In due time, Robredo submitted a 40-page report in which she outlined several recommendations to enhance the war on drugs program in a manner that is nonviolent and sustainable. Little is known to what extent these recommendations have been actually considered by the Duterte administration. "19 days after Duterte has been appointed, he was actually, sorry, Lenny Robredo was actually fired by President Duterte 19 days after she was appointed. This situation and the behavior of Duterte towards women and women public officials is important to point out because it has not only become infectious, which made it very quote unquote natural for male politicians to express similar sexist rhetoric against the vice president, but also other politicians and other public personalities. It is rather unfortunate because the Philippines have won the right to vote for women in 1937. It was long and a hard-fought battle, and yet it is 2020 and we have a president and his allies behaving this way. To my mind, it is a disgrace to the struggle of Filipinos to give women the rightful place in politics. It is also important to emphasize that Duterte also uses gendered rhetoric, not merely against women, but he also devalues anything quote unquote feminine. This situation then makes it possible for him to justify his masculinized image as a quote unquote protector of Filipinos. The last update I am discussing is fairly recent and in fact is still evolving as I speak. Nonetheless, I thought it is important to give you a glimpse of how it is in the Philippines in the time of COVID-19. The first case of COVID-19, as reports indicate, was in February 2020 when a Chinese couple vacationing in Boracay were first reported to be positive for COVID-19 and were being treated at a public hospital. Today, the Philippines has nearly 7,000 cases, nearly 400 deaths, and not to mention more than 600 Filipinos abroad who were infected by COVID as of April 17. Initially, Duterte's response was characteristic of his style. He brushed aside the pandemic and threatened to slap it. To be fair, a pandemic of this nature is unprecedented and no government would be fully prepared to take it on. Nonetheless, there are a lot of constants in the Philippine healthcare system that should have made any head of state be concerned. The country has consistently underinvested in health programs. Its health workers are in fact lured to work abroad. It was not until mid-March that a lockdown was imposed in the whole of Luzon. Subsequently, a law giving special powers for 3 months was given to Duterte to address the threat of the pandemic. State subsidy of $100 to $160 for 2 months to 18 million low-income Filipinos were provided. State subsidy of $100 to $160 for 2 months to 18 million low-income Filipinos were provided under the law. The initial implication was quite spotty. There were reports that not everyone were receiving the assistance. Some mayors, particularly in Metro Manila, took initiatives on testing and in serving their constituents due to a lack of direction from the national government. Generally, the framework in which COVID-19 has been responded to by the government can be looked at as a law enforcement framework. For instance, the members of the task force to address COVID are actually former military officials. Right now, as COVID-19 continues to rise in the Philippines, the cases continue to rise in the Philippines, there are a lot of military checkpoints and police visibility around the area where lockdown is being imposed. This is understandable, but it has created fear among the populace. This is also borne by the fact that in his media appearances, Duterte seemingly is incoherent and sometimes bizarre in explaining things about his response to the pandemic. He is also instilling fear among those who will not subscribe to the lockdown, who will not obey to the lockdown. He is instilling fear about those who will not. He is instilling fear on those who will not obey the lockdown or who will violate the lockdown, including instilling fear and threatening some mayors who will not be towing the line of the national guidelines on the pandemic. Generally speaking, his periodic media appearances actually does not, generally speaking, Duterte's media appearances do not inspire, and they're lacking in empathy at the time that the country needs it most. But the Duterte style has no room for empathy, for it is quote unquote feminine and therefore a sign of weakness. The consequence is that the Philippines has been reported to be lagging behind among countries battling COVID. We also have a high rate of health workers afflicted with COVID, more than 1,000 at the latest, which to my mind can be attributed not only to the structural inefficiency of the health system, even prior to Duterte, but the late response of the administration in taking the virus seriously. I am certain that Duterte's response to COVID will be something that would shape the 2022 elections and how Filipinos would seek accountability from its leaders. Compared to Typhoon Haiyan, for instance, which was regional in nature, COVID affected all income classes. What is also alarming is that the militarized nature of the COVID response already has its initial victim. Just very recently, a police officer at a checkpoint killed an unarmed man who was reportedly violating the lockdown. He was killed in broad daylight. Reports have it that he is a former military person who served in Mindanao and who has a post-traumatic stress disorder and therefore was not in his right mind. To conclude, the updates that I have discussed tell us how militarized politics and the politics of fear is born by the notion that to govern by force is the best way to lead, that valorizing the masculine and denigrating the feminine has consequences. But the enemy is not Duterte per se, but the thinking that politics is a zero-sum game. The enemy is not Duterte per se, but patriarchy or the rule of men, so to speak, or the understanding that the only barometer of leadership and power is a masculine type. Thank you and good day.